Mr. Voss, if that truck is still visible from the street by Friday at 6 p.m., the association will authorize removal at your expense. The message appeared in Graham Voss's HOA portal at 7:14 on a Wednesday morning, stamped in a neat gray header that made it look less like a threat and more like a utility bill. Outside, Stonebridge Hollow was already awake in the controlled, polished way that gated neighborhoods like to pretend was natural. Sprinkler heads hissed along the curb in perfect intervals, misting the edges of clipped lawns while the smell of hot asphalt rose from the cul-de-sac under a pale summer sun. The truck stayed where it had always stayed. It was a dark blue pickup, 12 years old, washed every Sunday, tires clean, registration current, no company lettering, no trailer hitch rust, no cracked windshield, no oil stain beneath it. Graham had parked it on the right side of his own driveway, 2 feet from the garage apron and just far enough from the green utility cabinet that any service technician could open both doors without stepping into the flower bed. He knew that because he had measured it once, not out of fear, but out of habit. Men who spent 22 years reading site plans did not stop noticing clearances just because they retired. Stonebridge Hollow noticed everything else. The HOA notice claimed the vehicle created a front-facing visual disruption inconsistent with driveway harmony standards. And beneath that language came the numbers: $96, $40 for aesthetic driveway noncompliance, $57, $25 for a reinspection visit, and $31, $80 for digital photo processing through the association's compliance vendor. Total balance due, $185. 45. It was the kind of number that made nonsense feel official. Graham stood in his kitchen with one hand around a plain white coffee mug, reading the message twice while the refrigerator hummed behind him and the pool gate at the clubhouse clanked somewhere down the block. He did not smile. He did not swear. He simply clicked the attachment and saw the photograph Meredith Pikewell had taken from the sidewalk, angled low enough to make his truck look larger than it was and cropped tight enough to hide the utility marker near the driveway edge. That told him plenty. At 7:42, a golf cart rolled to a stop in front of his house, its electric motor whining softly before it went quiet. Meredith stepped out as if arriving at a board hearing instead of a neighbor's driveway, dressed in white slacks, a coral blouse, and a straw visor with the Stonebridge Hollow crest stitched above the brim. She carried a clipboard, a phone, and the kind of smile people used when they had already decided they were right. Graham opened the front door before she could ring the bell. "Good morning, Mr. Voss," she said, voice bright enough to reach the house across the street. "I assume you received the courtesy notice." Courtesy was doing a lot of work in that sentence. Behind her, 2 sprinkler heads clicked off at once, leaving the street suddenly too quiet. Graham stepped onto the porch in faded jeans and a gray work shirt, calm, broad-shouldered, and still as a fence post. "I received a tow threat," he said. Meredith's smile tightened by half an inch. She looked past him toward the truck, then down at her clipboard, then back at him with practiced patience. "The board has broad discretion over exterior presentation. Your vehicle is creating an appearance issue at the entrance curve of the cul-de-sac. We have had concerns." "From who?" Graham asked. "The association does not disclose compliance sources." "So from you." Meredith blinked once. It landed. She lifted the clipboard higher, like paper could give her more height. "You have 48 hours to place the vehicle in the garage or relocate it to an approved off-site storage area. After that, we will contact our towing vendor." Graham looked at the truck, then at the driveway, then at the small green utility cabinet sitting beside the concrete like an overlooked witness. The cabinet had been there before his mailbox, before the pavers, before half the ornamental trees on the block. He remembered the survey from closing. He remembered the easement line. He remembered a narrow clause buried near the back of the covenants, the sort of clause people skipped until it became the only sentence that mattered. Meredith mistook his silence for hesitation. "I really would hate for this to become expensive," she said. "Then make it official," Graham replied. She tilted her head. "Excuse me." Graham set his coffee mug on the porch rail and kept his voice flat. "Send me the tow authorization in writing. Include the rule you're relying on, the exact location of the truck, the amount you intend to charge, and your signature as HOA president." For the first time, Meredith stopped smiling completely. A delivery van passed the gate behind her, tires whispering over warm pavement, and somewhere nearby a wind chime gave one soft metallic note. Graham did not move. He had not raised his voice, had not threatened a lawsuit, had not stepped off his porch. But something in the air had shifted, and Meredith felt it even if she did not understand it. She looked at the truck again, then at the driveway beneath it, as if concrete could suddenly become complicated. "Gladly," she said at last. Graham picked up his coffee. "Good," he said. "Put every word in writing." By noon, Stonebridge Hollow had returned to its usual performance of order, but Graham could feel the neighborhood watching through blinds, porch cameras, and polite kitchen windows. His house sat on Larkspur Gate Drive, fourth from the bend, where the cul-de-sac curved around a landscaped island planted with dwarf magnolias and river stones too clean to look natural. The air smelled faintly of warm plastic from irrigation tubing and chlorine drifting from the clubhouse pool beyond the privacy wall. Everything here had a rule. Trash bins could not be visible after 7:30 p.m. Holiday flags could not exceed 24 inches in width. Porch lights had to match the approved warm white range, and basketball hoops were permitted only if rolled behind the fence line within 11 minutes of use. Stonebridge Hollow did not simply manage homes. It managed evidence of living. Graham had never fought the small things. He repainted his mailbox when the HOA changed the approved black from satin to semi-gloss. He trimmed the crepe myrtle when the landscape committee claimed one branch crossed the sidewalk by 3.5 inches. He even paid a $42.60 seasonal mulch tone correction fee 3 years earlier because arguing over brown versus dark brown felt like a waste of breath. But the pickup was different. It was his personal vehicle, parked on his concrete, beside his garage, inside the property he paid taxes on. Meredith Pikewell had picked the wrong piece of concrete. At 12:18 p.m., the HOA portal updated again with a document titled Final Exterior Vehicle Compliance Notice. Graham opened it at his desk, where old survey tubes leaned in the corner and a framed Corps of Engineers certificate hung beside a black and white photo of him in uniform. The letter cited Section 6.14b of the Stonebridge Hollow Residential Standards. No owner shall maintain any vehicle, object, or exterior condition that materially disrupts visual uniformity from common drives, entry curves, or shared frontage sight lines. Beneath that, Meredith had added a president's interpretation. A dark pickup truck visible from the cul-de-sac curve constitutes a removable aesthetic obstruction. That was not a rule. That was a reach. The notice repeated the balance. $185.45 already posted, plus $74.35 per calendar day beginning Saturday at 6:01 p.m., plus a $128.90 vendor coordination fee if towing was scheduled. It also warned that refusal to comply could result in association-directed removal without further in-person notice. Graham leaned back and read that sentence 3 times. Without further in-person notice. He knew why phrases like that existed. They were meant to sound administrative enough that ordinary people would obey before asking what authority stood behind them. Outside his window, Meredith's golf cart glided past slowly, not stopping, just passing, the way patrol cars passed when they wanted curtains to move. Graham watched her visor disappear beyond the magnolias. Then he opened the lower drawer of his desk and pulled out the closing folder from the year he bought the house. It was thick, dull, and more powerful than Meredith's clipboard. The recorded plat map was folded behind the title policy, still creased along the surveyor's blue stamp. Graham spread it across the desk and held the corners down with a stapler, a tape measure, a coffee mug, and an old brass paperweight. He found Lot 17 first, then the driveway outline, then the thin dashed line crossing the lower right portion of the concrete. The label was small but clean, 15-foot recorded utility easement, federally regulated access and maintenance corridor. There it was. Graham did not celebrate. He got quieter. The easement was not decorative language, and it did not ban ordinary residential parking. It protected clear access to the cabinet, cover, and service corridor when maintenance was needed. It served the underground feeder line and the green utility cabinet sitting near the driveway apron, the same cabinet Meredith had cropped out of her photo. Graham flipped to the covenants next, moving with the patient care of someone assembling a bridge load calculation. Section 2. 03 gave the HOA authority over exterior appearance. Section 6.14 gave them vehicle visibility rules. But Section 11.08 limited everything that came before it. No association rule, fine, improvement standard, or enforcement action shall impair, obstruct, penalize, or interfere with any recorded utility easement, access right, service corridor, or maintenance obligation benefiting public, municipal, or federally regulated utility infrastructure. Graham underlined nothing. He did not need to. He scanned the page, saved the plat map, saved the covenant section, and created a folder on his desktop named Larkspur Easement. Then he wrote Meredith one reply, short enough to fit on a phone screen. Please confirm whether the association's tow authorization applies to the marked portion of my driveway within the recorded 15-foot utility easement shown on the Lot 17 plat. He attached the map. He attached Section 11.08. He attached nothing else. At 1:06 p.m., Meredith answered with the confidence of a person who had not read either file. The association's authority remains unchanged. The vehicle must be removed from visible driveway frontage by the stated deadline. Graham looked through the window at the truck, still clean, still legal, still exactly where it had been. The sprinklers started again along the curb, ticking in sequence like a clock counting down for the wrong person. By late afternoon, the heat had settled over Larkspur Gate Drive in a flat, shimmering layer, turning every windshield into a white flash and every section of sidewalk into a strip of glare. Graham's pickup sat in the same place, angled squarely inside the driveway lines, its shadow falling across the concrete, but nowhere near the green utility cabinet. Across the cul-de-sac, two neighbors pretended to adjust a garden hose that had needed no adjusting 20 minutes earlier. Stonebridge Hollow was never louder than when it was pretending not to listen. At 4:05 p.m., Meredith Pikewell returned, this time not alone. She had brought two members of the Architectural Review Committee, both in polo shirts with embroidered HOA initials, and a younger property manager named Alan Briggs, who carried a tablet and looked like he would rather be anywhere else. Meredith positioned herself near the curb, exactly where the entry curve gave her the most dramatic view of Graham's driveway. She was staging a violation. Graham came out before she reached the porch, closing the door behind him without hurry. The air smelled of hot asphalt, sun-warmed boxwood, and the faint chemical sweetness from the community pool filtration shed behind the north wall. Meredith tapped her pen against the clipboard 3 times. Mr. Voss, since you've chosen not to correct the condition, we're conducting a board-observed exterior review. Graham glanced at the tablet in Alan's hands. Is that a formal inspection? Meredith's smile returned, thinner than before. It is a compliance confirmation. Different words matter, Graham said. Alan looked down. The two committee members avoided eye contact and studied the truck as if it might explain itself. Meredith read from the printed standards, her voice pitched for the nearby windows. Section 6.14b. Exterior visual disruption. Section 6.14d. Frontage consistency. Section 9.02a. Board discretion in preserving neighborhood appearance. Then she added, with the confidence of someone building a fence out of fog, that the pickup created a negative sightline impact from the shared curve of Larkspur Gate Drive. Graham nodded once. Is the truck abandoned? That is not the issue. Is it unregistered? No one said that. Is it commercial? It presents as utilitarian. That was not my question. Meredith's cheeks tightened. The small audience across the street went still, even the garden hose dropping a thin stream into the gutter. Graham's voice stayed level. He asked whether the tires crossed the sidewalk, whether the vehicle blocked emergency access, whether it leaked fluid, whether the covenants banned ordinary pickups from private driveways, and whether the HOA had measured the exact distance between the truck and the utility cabinet before threatening removal. Meredith answered none of those directly. Instead, she returned to community standards and frontage harmony and the board's broad authority. Broad authority was not the same as lawful authority. Graham let her finish. Then he opened the folder he had carried under one arm and took out the Lot 17 plat, the same recorded map showing the 15-foot easement line across the lower portion of the driveway. He did not hand it to her immediately. He placed it flat on the hood of his pickup, weighted one corner with his phone, and pointed to the dashed corridor. This is the area you photographed, he said. This is also the area you want to tow from. Meredith glanced at it for less than 2 seconds. The association is not debating your personal interpretation of a map. It is not personal, Graham said. It is recorded. Alan finally leaned closer. His eyes moved from the map to the driveway, then to the green utility cabinet Meredith's original photo had hidden. That was the first crack. Meredith must have sensed it, because she shifted hard into procedure. She announced that refusal to comply would trigger the daily $74.35 penalty beginning Saturday at 6:01 p.m. The $128.90 vendor coordination fee, and any direct towing cost billed back to the homeowner ledger. She said it all crisply, as if precision could rescue overreach. Graham asked one more question. Are you confirming the tow order covers the marked easement area? Meredith lifted her chin. I am confirming that the board's authority covers the visible driveway frontage. Graham looked at Alan. Please make sure that wording goes into the minutes. Alan swallowed. Meredith's pen stopped tapping. For the first time that day, she seemed to understand that Graham was not trying to win the argument on the sidewalk. He was preserving it. The sun dropped lower behind the magnolias, turning the HOA committee shadows long and thin across the curb. Graham folded the plat map with careful, military neatness and slid it back into the folder. Then I'll wait for the written tow authorization, he said. Meredith's smile flickered back on, but it no longer reached her eyes. You'll have it tonight. Graham stepped back toward his porch. That is all I asked for. At 8:37 that evening, while the sky over Stonebridge Hollow faded from copper to a dull summer blue, the HOA portal sent Graham a new notification with the subject line, Tow Authorization Confirmation, Lot 17. The house was quiet except for the low hum of the air conditioner and the distant splash of someone closing the clubhouse pool gate after hours. Outside on Larkspur Gate Drive, the irrigation system had shut off, leaving beads of water clinging to the curb grass and a damp mineral smell rising from the concrete. Graham opened the document slowly. Meredith had signed it. The authorization stated that the association, under Section 6.14b, Section 6.14d, and Section 9.02a, had determined that the visible pickup on the right side driveway frontage of Lot 17 created an exterior presentation violation and was subject to removal if not relocated by Friday at 6 p.m. It listed the growing charges with cold precision, $185. 45 outstanding, $74. 35 per day after the deadline, $128. 90 vendor coordination fee upon tow dispatch, and all removal and storage costs assessed to owner ledger. It also included a compliance photograph taken from the same low angle as before. This time, Meredith had made the mistake Graham had been waiting for. She tied the tow order to the exact strip of driveway covered by the recorded easement. She had attached a marked diagram. Graham zoomed in on the page, adjusted his glasses, and looked at the red circle someone had drawn around the truck's parking location. The circle overlapped the dashed easement corridor by nearly its full width. The green utility cabinet was visible in the corner of the frame, small but undeniable, standing beside the driveway like a quiet witness that had finally been called to testify. Graham did not grin. He saved the file. Then he printed it. Paper mattered when people tried to pretend emails had not meant what they clearly meant. He laid the tow authorization beside the recorded plat, the title policy, the closing survey, and the Stonebridge Hollow covenants open to Section 11.08. The clause sat there in ordinary black type, not bold, not dramatic, not designed for a courtroom scene, but strong enough to challenge the one thing Meredith had already put in writing: enforcement inside a recorded easement area. It read, no association rule, fine, improvement standard, or enforcement action shall impair, obstruct, penalize, or interfere with any recorded utility easement, access right, service corridor, or maintenance obligation benefiting public, municipal, or federally regulated utility infrastructure. That sentence was the hinge. Graham took out a yellow legal pad and wrote a timeline by hand, because years of engineering work had taught him that clean chronology could do what anger never could. 7:14 a.m. Portal notice issued. 12:18 p.m. Final compliance notice. 1:06 p.m. HOA confirms authority despite easement attachment. 4:05 p.m. Board observed review on driveway. 8:37 p.m. Signed tow authorization includes marked easement area. For lines. One trap. He then drafted an email, not to Meredith, but to the Regional Utility Access Compliance Office listed on the easement record. He attached the Lot 17 plat, the signed HOA tow authorization, the Section 11.08 covenant clause, and 2 photographs he took himself from straight-on angles. One showing the pickup inside the driveway, the other showing the open clearance to the utility cabinet. The subject line was plain: potential interference with recorded 15-foot utility easement, Stonebridge Hollow Lot 17. He did not accuse anyone of a crime. He did not call anyone corrupt. He asked for guidance. That was enough. At 9:22 p.m. He sent the email and copied the HOA's general compliance inbox, not Meredith directly. He wanted the record to belong to the board, not to a hallway argument with a woman who liked witnesses only when she chose them. 12 minutes later, his phone buzzed with a portal message from Meredith. Your attempt to complicate a simple driveway matter has been noted. Graham read it once and placed the phone face down. Simple was often the word people used when they had not read the documents. Outside, a golf cart passed slowly again, its tires making a faint rubber whisper over the private road. It paused near his driveway long enough for Graham to see the glow of a phone screen through the window. Then it moved on. Graham turned off the desk lamp, leaving only the printed easement papers beneath the soft kitchen light. The truck remained exactly where it was, clean, legal, and still. For the first time since Meredith's first notice, Graham felt the shape of the ending. Not loud, not dramatic. Written. By Thursday morning, Graham had stopped reacting and started documenting. He woke before sunrise, when Larkspur Gate Drive was still gray and quiet, and the only sound outside was the soft clicking of the community irrigation valves opening zone by zone beneath the curb. The air carried the clean, damp smell of wet concrete and clipped boxwood, mixed with the faint chlorine drift from the clubhouse pool on the other side of the privacy wall. Graham made coffee, pulled on the same gray work shirt, and walked outside with a tape measure, a clipboard, and his phone. He did not move the truck. He measured instead. From the passenger side mirror to the edge of the green utility cabinet, 62.5 inches. From the rear tire to the stamped utility access cover, 41.75 inches. From the front bumper to the public sidewalk expansion joint, 7 feet, 3 inches. He photographed each measurement straight on, without dramatic angles, without shadows hiding anything, without the kind of framing Meredith had used to turn a clean pickup into a neighborhood emergency. Facts looked better when they were boring. At 7:08 a.m., he uploaded the photos into his Larkspur easement folder and wrote a one-page statement titled Access Condition, Lot 17 Driveway. He listed the date, time, location, weather, vehicle position, and the clear path to the utility cabinet. Then he quoted Section 11.08 exactly, followed by Meredith's signed tow authorization and her phrase, visible driveway frontage. That phrase mattered. It showed she was not worried about blocked access, safety, leaking fluids, abandoned property, or emergency clearance. She was worried about seeing a pickup from the curve. At 8:16 a.m., the HOA portal updated the owner ledger again. The balance remained $185.45, but a new pending line appeared. Tow vendor scheduling review, $128.90, assessed upon dispatch. Beneath it was a note from Association Compliance. Failure to relocate vehicle by Friday, 6 p.m. will activate continuing penalties of $74.35 per calendar day. Graham took a screenshot. Then he did exactly what Meredith had asked him to do in the most inconveniently precise way possible. He submitted a request for architectural clarification through the portal, selecting the category Driveway Frontage Issue, and attached the easement plat, the measurements, the straight-on photos, and a single question. Please identify the association rule that allows enforcement action within a recorded 15-foot utility easement despite Section 11.08. He knew they would hate that form. Forms were made for homeowners to confess, not for homeowners to ask better questions. At 10:31 a.m., Meredith called. Graham let it go to voicemail. Her voice came through bright and tight, saying the board did not appreciate legal theatrics, and that common-sense compliance would avoid unnecessary escalation. She said the truck could be placed inside the garage or moved to an approved off-site storage lot by 6 p.m. Friday. She did not mention the easement. That omission was louder than an answer. Graham saved the voicemail and emailed the HOA general inbox again. For the record, I am not refusing access, obstructing infrastructure, or preventing inspection. The vehicle remains lawfully parked on my driveway with 62.5 inches of clearance to the utility cabinet and 41.75 inches to the access cover. Please confirm whether the association still intends removal from the easement corridor. He copied the utility access compliance office again. At 11:47 a.m. An automated reply arrived from the utility office, followed by a real one 10 minutes later from Howard Trask, Regional Access Compliance Supervisor. Howard wrote that his office had received the documentation and would review the recorded easement before the stated tow deadline. The message was only 4 sentences long. It changed the temperature of the whole day. Graham printed it and placed it on top of the folder. Outside, Meredith's golf cart came around the cul-de-sac after lunch, slower than usual, stopping once near the landscaped island where the magnolia leaves rattled in a dry summer breeze. She looked at Graham's driveway, then at the green utility cabinet, then at the truck. This time she took no photo. Graham watched from behind the screen door, not hiding, not performing. He understood the rhythm now. Meredith had built her authority on speed, embarrassment, and the hope that people would pay before reading. Graham's answer was delay, paper, and exact language. By 3:40 p.m., the HOA portal marked his clarification request as received, pending board review, but the tow deadline stayed active. That was the opening. Graham sent one final message before dinner. Because the association has not withdrawn the tow authorization, I will maintain the vehicle in its current documented position to preserve utility access conditions until the easement holder responds. It sounded like compliance because it was. It sounded harmless because it was not. As the sun dropped behind the privacy wall, the sprinklers shut off one by one, leaving the cul-de-sac in a damp, polished silence. Graham folded the latest email into the folder, set it beside his keys, and looked once through the window at the pickup. Meredith wanted him to move it, so he kept it exactly where the law needed it to be. Friday arrived with the kind of still heat that made Stonebridge Hollow feel sealed under glass. By 5:12 p.m., the sun sat low over Larkspur Gate Drive, turning the clubhouse wall gold and pulling long shadows from the dwarf magnolias in the center island. The air smelled like hot pavers, pool chlorine, and cedar smoke from someone's early backyard grill. Graham's pickup had not moved an inch. Its tires were clean, its mirrors folded in, and the clearances Graham had documented the day before remained unchanged. At 5:28 p.m., the first neighbors began appearing for no reason. A man 2 houses down checked an empty mailbox twice. A woman in tennis clothes carried one reusable grocery bag from her SUV and then stood by the tailgate pretending to search for another. Across the curve, Alan Briggs sat inside a parked HOA golf cart with a tablet on his knees, his face pale in the dashboard glow. Everyone knew something had been scheduled. No one wanted to admit they had come to watch. At 5:41 p.m., Meredith Pikewell rolled into view in her golf cart, followed by a white towing truck with amber lights mounted above the cab. She had chosen her moment carefully. Not too late for darkness, not too early for privacy, and close enough to the 6 p.m. deadline that she could call it procedural instead of theatrical. Her coral blouse had been replaced by a navy blazer, and she carried a red compliance folder thick enough to look official from a distance. Power like props. Graham stepped out at 5:44 p.m. with his own folder, thinner, plain black, and heavier in all the ways that mattered. Meredith did not walk up to his porch this time. She stood at the foot of the driveway, just beside the sidewalk, and addressed him as if the cul-de-sac were a boardroom. Mr. Voss, the association has provided notice under Section 6(14)(b), Section 6(14)(d), and Section 9(02)(a). Your vehicle remains in noncompliance. The tow vendor is authorized to proceed after 6 p.m. Graham looked at the tow operator, a broad white man in a reflective vest who was already studying the driveway with professional caution. Were you given the easement documents? Graham asked. The operator hesitated. Meredith answered for him. The vendor has the authorization he requires. That was not an answer. Graham opened his folder and held out one page, not to Meredith, but to the operator. This driveway section is part of a recorded 15-foot utility easement. The cabinet is there. The access cover is there. The HOA has been notified in writing. The tow operator took the page and glanced down. His expression changed before Meredith's did. People who worked around vehicles, property lines, and liability could smell a bad job before the hook touched metal. Meredith stepped forward. He is attempting to confuse a standard exterior enforcement matter. Graham did not look at her. Ask who pays if you tow from an easement after notice. The operator stopped walking. At 5:52 p.m., Meredith's phone chimed, and she ignored it. Alan Briggs's tablet chimed a second later, and he did not. He looked down, read, then looked toward the gate at the entrance of Larkspur Gate Drive. A white utility compliance SUV had stopped there, hazard lights blinking softly against the stone pillars. It did not rush. It did not need to. The vehicle rolled toward Lot 17 and parked behind the tow truck at exactly 5:55 p.m. A man in a short-sleeved work shirt stepped out, carrying a hard plastic document case and wearing an ID badge clipped to his chest. Graham recognized the name from the email before the man introduced himself. Howard Trask, he said, voice calm enough to make the whole street quieter. Regional Access Compliance. Meredith's face tightened, but she recovered quickly. This is an HOA driveway enforcement issue. Howard looked at the green utility cabinet, then at the access cover, then at the truck, then at the tow authorization in Meredith's red folder. Not if your enforcement action affects a recorded utility easement. The words landed flat and clean. No drama was required. Meredith tried to keep control by returning to procedure. She cited the $185.45 posted balance, the pending $128.90 vendor coordination fee, and the daily $74.35 penalty scheduled to begin at 6:01 p.m. She said the association had a duty to preserve property values and exterior uniformity along the shared frontage of Larkspur Gate Drive. Howard listened without interrupting, which somehow made it worse for her. Then he opened his document case and removed the Lot 17 easement record, the same dash line plaque Graham had sent, now printed with the utility office stamp in the corner. This corridor predates the current HOA standards, Howard said. Your own Section 11.08 recognizes that association enforcement cannot impair, obstruct, penalize, or interfere with recorded utility access rights. Alan's shoulders dropped. The tow operator handed Graham's page back and took 2 steps away from the pickup. Meredith looked at him sharply. You were contracted to remove a non-compliant vehicle. He shook his head once. I was contracted to tow from a driveway. I was not contracted to argue with a utility easement. The amber lights on the tow truck kept flashing, but suddenly they looked less like authority and more like embarrassment. At 6 p.m., Meredith glanced at her watch as if time itself might still side with her. Graham stood beside his porch rail, silent, folder closed, hands still. Howard looked at Meredith's signed authorization and said, I am advising you not to hook that vehicle until this office completes review of the recorded easement and access conditions. The cul-de-sac held its breath. The deadline passed. Nothing moved. For several seconds after 6 o'clock, no one on Larkspur Gate Drive seemed willing to be the first person to breathe normally. The tow truck's amber lights washed across the front of Graham's house, blinking over the white garage door, the wet curb grass, and the small green utility cabinet Meredith had tried so hard not to see. A sprinkler valve clicked somewhere under the sidewalk, then stopped, leaving the cul-de-sac in a strange polished silence. Howard Trask stood between the tow truck and the pickup with the stillness of a man who had spent years ending arguments by reading the right page. Meredith Pikewell recovered first, or tried to. She opened her red folder, removed the signed authorization, and held it out like a shield. The association is not obstructing utility access, she said. The vehicle is the obstruction. We are removing it under exterior standards. Howard took the document, read the marked diagram, and looked at the red circle drawn over the lower right side of Graham's driveway. The circle covered the dashed easement corridor almost perfectly. That was the problem with being too specific. This authorization directs a private tow vendor to enter and remove property from within a recorded access corridor, Howard said, after the homeowner notified you of the easement. Meredith's jaw tightened. The truck is visible from the shared frontage sightline. And after written notice of an easement, treating visibility as grounds for removal becomes a different problem. The tow operator folded his arms and looked toward the street, no longer interested in being part of anyone's lesson. Alan Briggs remained in the golf cart with his tablet, but his face had gone pale enough to show in the amber flashes. Across the cul-de-sac, the woman in tennis clothes had stopped pretending to unload groceries. Graham stayed near the porch, silent, letting the documents speak in his place. Howard opened his plastic case and laid 3 pages on the hood of the tow truck: the Lot 17 plat, the easement record, and the Stonebridge Hollow Covenant page with Section 11.08 highlighted. He did not raise his voice. Your own governing documents state that no association rule, fine, improvement standard, or enforcement action may be applied in a way that impairs, obstructs, penalizes, or interferes with recorded utility easements, access rights, service corridors, or maintenance obligations benefiting regulated utility infrastructure. The words were dry. The damage was not. Meredith tried to pivot to money, because money usually scared homeowners faster than clauses did. She said Graham's owner ledger already showed $185.45 in active charges, that the $128.90 vendor coordination fee had now been triggered, and that the $74.35 daily penalty began at 6:01 p.m. under the notice issued Wednesday. Howard looked at his watch. Then at 6:01 p.m. you will be assessing a penalty connected to enforcement inside a recorded easement after written notice from the homeowner and after notice from this office. Meredith did not answer. That answer was enough. Graham finally stepped down from the porch, not toward Meredith, but toward Howard. He handed him the printed email chain in chronological order: the 7:14 a.m. portal notice, the 12:18 final compliance notice, Meredith's 106 refusal to address the easement, the 8:37 tow authorization, the 10:31 voicemail transcript, and the portal ledger screenshot from Thursday morning. Howard reviewed the stack with the efficient calm of a supervisor who had seen pride become paperwork before. He asked Alan whether the board had received Graham's clarification request citing Section 11.08. Alan looked at Meredith first. That made the whole street understand the answer before he spoke. Yes, Alan said softly. It was received and marked pending board review. Howard nodded. But the tow remained active. Alan swallowed. Yes. Meredith snapped the folder shut. The board cannot allow every homeowner to invent exceptions to the standards. Graham looked at her then, his face tired but steady. I did not invent the easement. Howard picked up the plat and tapped the dashed line once with his finger. And the county record did not invent it this week. A few neighbors looked down, trying not to react too openly. The line was not dramatic, but in a place like Stonebridge Hollow, humiliation rarely needed volume. It traveled through silence. Meredith turned to the tow operator. Are you refusing the job? He glanced at Howard's badge, Graham's documents, and the green cabinet beside the driveway. I am declining to hook a vehicle inside a disputed utility corridor after being notified on site. He climbed back into his cab and began shutting down the amber lights. One by one, the flashes disappeared from Graham's garage door. The street looked smaller without them. At 6:09 p.m., Howard gave Meredith a written field notice recommending that no removal, fee escalation, or access-altering enforcement proceed until the utility office completed its easement review. He handed a copy to Graham and one to Alan. Meredith accepted hers with 2 fingers, as if paper could stain. Graham did not smile. He simply folded his copy and placed it in his black folder. The pickup remained exactly where it had been all week, ordinary and immovable in the soft evening heat. Meredith had come to make an example of him. Instead, she had signed the example herself. By Monday morning, the heat had broken, and Stonebridge Hollow woke under a pale, overcast sky that made every white garage door and trimmed hedge look flatter, less certain. The gutters along Larkspur Gate Drive still held last night's rain, and the air smelled of wet cedar mulch, pool chlorine, and damp concrete cooling under the clouds. Graham's pickup sat in the same documented position beside the garage, ordinary as ever, with 62.5 inches of clearance to the green utility cabinet and 41.75 inches to the stamped access cover. Nothing had changed except the people looking at it. At 8:03 a.m., the HOA portal sent a new message, but this one did not arrive with Meredith Pikewell's clipped language or the usual red, action required banner. It came from the general board account under the subject, Temporary Suspension of Enforcement, Lot 17 Driveway Matter. Graham opened it at the kitchen table while coffee steamed beside his black folder. The message stated that, pending review of the recorded easement and Section 11.08 of the Stonebridge Hollow Covenants, all tow-related enforcement actions tied to the marked driveway location on Lot 17 were paused. The $74.35 daily penalty was suspended. The $128.90 vendor coordination fee was placed under administrative review. The original $185.45 balance was marked inactive pending determination. It was not an apology. It was retreat wearing a necktie. Graham took a screenshot, printed the message, and added it to the folder behind Howard Trask's field notice. At 9:26 a.m., a second email arrived, this time from Howard, copying the HOA's board address and the property management company. His office had completed the preliminary review. The recorded 15-foot easement crossed the lower right portion of Graham's driveway, including the exact location marked in Meredith's tow authorization. The issue was not the existence of HOA standards. It was the attempt to use those standards as the sole basis for removal from a documented access corridor. The green utility cabinet and underground feeder access required an unobstructed service corridor, and nothing in the submitted photographs showed Graham's vehicle blocking that access. Howard's final paragraph was short. Association enforcement based solely on visual frontage standards should not be applied in a manner that penalizes or interferes with the recorded utility easement area. That sentence did what Graham had waited for all week. It made the obvious official. By 10:40 a.m., the portal ledger changed again. $96. 40 aesthetic driveway noncompliance, removed. $57. 25 reinspection visit, removed. $31. 80 digital photo processing, removed. $128. 90 tow vendor coordination, removed. $74. 35 daily penalty, voided before assessment. Balance due, $0. 00. Graham looked at the total for a long moment, not because the money was large, but because the number proved how small the whole thing had been from the beginning. 5 fees, 4 days, 1 truck, and an entire board willing to pretend a driveway was a crisis because one woman did not like losing control. At 11:15 a.m., Alan Briggs came by alone, without the golf cart crest flag, without Meredith, without an audience. He stood at the porch with a sealed white envelope and the embarrassed posture of someone delivering words written by a committee. Graham opened the door. Alan cleared his throat and said the board had instructed him to provide written confirmation that the enforcement action had been withdrawn, the tow authorization rescinded, and the owner ledger corrected. He also said, carefully, that the board would be reviewing all vehicle-related standards where recorded utility easements were present. That should have happened before Friday, Graham said. Alan nodded. Yes, sir. The admission was quiet. That made it count. Inside the envelope was a formal notice printed on HOA letterhead. It did not say Meredith had been wrong. It said the association had identified a procedural inconsistency between exterior enforcement and recorded easement limitations. It did not say Graham had been right. It said the board had determined that continued enforcement would not be appropriate under Section 11.08. Graham knew how organizations apologized when they could not afford the word apology. He had seen it in government memos, construction disputes, and post-incident reviews. The language was careful, but the result was clean. Across the street, a neighbor who had watched the tow truck scene lifted one hand in a small, awkward wave. Graham returned it with a nod. No speeches. No victory lap. Later that afternoon, Meredith's golf cart passed Lot 17 without slowing down. She wore sunglasses despite the cloud cover and kept both hands fixed on the wheel. She did not look at the truck, the driveway, the cabinet, or the porch where Graham stood with a mug of coffee. That was new. The neighborhood sounded different without her stopping there. Rainwater ticking from magnolia leaves, a garage door rolling open 2 houses down, the soft hiss of tires over damp private pavement. Graham placed the HOA letter in the folder, slid the folder into the lower drawer of his desk, and left the pickup where it was. Not as a challenge, not as decoration, just as a truck parked on a driveway that had always been more protected than Meredith knew. The final answer came 3 days later, not from Meredith, not from the property manager, and not from the HOA board trying to soften the landing, but from Howard Trask's office in a formal compliance memorandum copied to Stonebridge Hollow, the towing vendor, and Graham Voss. Graham read it at his kitchen table just after sunrise, while Larkspur Gate Drive sat quiet under a thin layer of morning mist, and the clubhouse pool pumps hummed faintly behind the privacy wall. The memorandum stated that the lower right portion of Lot 17's driveway was part of a recorded 15-foot utility easement tied to federally regulated access and maintenance rights, that the pickup had not obstructed the utility cabinet or access cover, and that the HOA's signed tow authorization had targeted a location inside the protected corridor after written notice had been provided. Then came the sentence Meredith could not talk around. The association is directed to cease and refrain from any towing action, fee escalation, obstruction, or aesthetic enforcement that interferes with the recorded utility easement area unless reviewed and approved by the easement holder. That was the blow. Meredith could not appeal to taste, preference, or neighborhood image. It was not loud, but it was legal. By noon, Stonebridge Hollow's board posted an official community update through the portal, careful and bloodless in the way organizations speak when they have lost cleanly. All driveway enforcement involving utility markers would now require deed review, easement verification, and written management approval before any red tag, tow notice, or owner ledger charge could be issued. The board also rescinded Meredith's authority to approve immediate towing without full board review, a small line buried near the end of the update. But every homeowner who had ever received one of her cold little notices knew exactly what it meant. Her clipboard still looked official, but now everyone knew it had limits. Graham did not forward the memo to the neighborhood group. He did not print it and tape it to his garage. He did not stand in the driveway waiting for Meredith to pass. The truth was already in the system where it mattered. The ledger showed $0. 00. The tow vendor had written that no removal would occur. The board had changed its procedure, and the easement holder had put the HOA on formal notice. That was enough. Late that afternoon, Graham walked to the curb and looked back at the driveway the way a man looks at something ordinary after someone else has tried to take it from him. The pickup sat clean and still, its front end facing the garage, its rear tire exactly where Meredith's red circle had once tried to turn concrete into a violation. Beside it, the green utility cabinet stood in plain sight, no longer cropped out, no longer invisible, no longer convenient to ignore. A breeze moved through the magnolias in the center island, carrying the damp smell of cedar mulch and the faint chlorine of the pool, and for once the cul-de-sac felt less like a display case and more like a place where people actually lived. Meredith passed once near dusk in her golf cart, slower than necessary, but faster than before. She kept her face forward. Graham lifted his mug in a small, neutral gesture, not mocking, not friendly, just acknowledging the end of the matter. She did not return it. That was fine. He had never needed her approval. He had needed her to stop pretending her preferences were law. In neighborhoods ruled by portals, fines, committees, and phrases like visual harmony, it is easy for ordinary people to forget that official-looking paper is not the same as authority. Sometimes the strongest defense is not anger, not revenge, not a public argument on the sidewalk, but a deed, a survey, a recorded easement, and the patience to ask one simple question before the other side realizes what it is signing. Graham's driveway had not changed. The truck had not changed. The law had not changed. Only the illusion of unlimited HOA power had cracked, and once it cracked, every homeowner on Larkspur Gate Drive understood that even a private driveway could carry a legal line the HOA could not cross. This story is a fictional narrative created for entertainment, reflection, and educational purposes. Any resemblance to real people, places, or events is purely coincidental.